Every now and again in the great institution of scouting, specifically the Scouting in America kind, the National Committee decides to shake things up when it comes to the merit badges. And this has resulted in a number of changes to a lot of different badges over the years. Now, oftentimes this is just badges being reworked. For instance, you have leather working into leather craft, into leather work, into leather work. But other times, some badges are deemed too broad and are thus divided into other badges, like marksmanship being split off into rifle and shotgun shooting, respectively. Others might be combined because they were already sort of similar, or one was too niche, like bookbinding being merged into the graphic design merit badge. Among those, however, are a bunch of discontinued badges, and some of them are funny or weird, and I want to talk about a few. First off, stalking, just right off the bat. Now, the name of this one is a little bit alarming, but when you start really looking into the requirements and what it's actually about, you realize that this is really supposed to just be educating you on a lot of actually pretty useful skills, identifying animals by their tracks. It's about stalking animals. Even if you aren't, like, actively hunting, it's still pretty useful from, like, a safety or life-saving standpoint to be able to identify local animals by the tracks that they might leave around you if you're out in the wilderness. And there weren't that many requirements for it, mostly just involved identifying local animals, tracking an animal, which could be a little bit dangerous, you know, if you have your kid tracking like a fox or a wolf or something through the woods. But for the most part, it's not too weird until you get to the penultimate requirement. Submit satisfactory evidence that you have tracked a human being and deduced from the trail whether it was a man or woman, young or old, the gait or speed, and also give any other information deduced. I'm gonna need you to follow an old man through the woods silently. Don't let him know you're there, and I want you to track his footprints and tell me all the information you can glean about him. I genuinely don't know why this is here. Maybe for, like, search and rescue skills or something like that, but it's really bizarre. I have no clue how they would have factored things like different, like, shoes into it. I'm not sure how you can, maybe you really can deduce, like, the sex of a person based off of their shoes or something like that. Identifying the age is what really gets me here. Like, you can I guess you could determine it by, like, the size or something in most cases, but something about that, like, this is a child. It's so funny. That's not to say that there aren't good things in here, and in fact, in 2010, for the 100th anniversary of Scouting, a number of badges were brought back as sort of like limited collectors kinds of things, and stalking was one of them. However, there it was called tracking, which is probably a little more accurate and a little less creepy of a name. I do think there's a lot of merit, to the ability to track and identify animals, and some of that was wrapped into the mammal study merit badge, which is, like, kind of neat. But yeah, this is just stalking. Great start. The second one is one that only existed. I think this is a rarity. It only existed for the first year of Scouting, from 1910 to 1911. It did not show up in the second edition of the Scouting Handbook. It's called Master at Arms, which already sounds really cool. This was a self-defense based merit badge, which required you to, quote, earn proficiency in 2 of 7 martial arts. The ones given are single stick, quarterstaff, fencing, boxing, jujitsu, gymnastics, and wrestling. Let me tell you, I have been around children in the woods, that's a weird way to start that sentence, who who are messing around with sticks, and hospital visits have been involved. So I can't say that I'm like, I can't say it's a mystery why this one didn't stick around for very long. I mean, even in 1911, this was deemed maybe not the best idea. Although I think there is like, I kind of like the idea. I like the idea because in scouting you already learn a lot of first aid and rescue techniques and skills, and I think it's actually kind of reasonable to offer some sort of self-defense training. It's not a situation that is terribly unlikely, and it's always good to have some ability to do, I mean, I like, you're already trusting scouts to like shoot guns and carry knives in the woods and start fires. I don't think teaching them how to do like a defensive grapple or a roll or something like that, just to protect themselves or other people, is that unreasonable, legitimately. But maybe not in the form of of having a sword and fencing. Because like the only application for fencing in there is like, if this, like, all the other ones are like, yeah, you could use this theoretically to like defend yourself. Fencing is like, do they want you to like carry a sword? There's an article that I found this description of Master at Arms from, and it's these two, and I guess it's like a historical document picture of like these two kids, and one is just decking the other kid, like he's counter. The next one is perhaps a little less exciting, but I do find it quite charming. Beekeeping. This was unfortunately discontinued around 1995, pretty much just due to unpopularity. I believe in the last year that it was offered, only 60 scouts got it. It just wasn't that interesting to a lot of people. But in the time since, there's actually been a resurgence in interest for beekeeping among scouts. And there was a high volume of requests to bring it back, so National decided not to reinstate it completely as a badge, but to add bee education to badges like nature, forestry, gardening, and plant science, and so on, because bees are a very important part of our global ecosystem. So it makes sense to include them in some way in like a scouting education. There's one requirement from the beekeeping badge which I love. It is study a hive of bees, remove the combs, find the queen. Just like, hey kid, just stick your head in the beehive. Find the queen. A sort of minor one in the overall realm of discontinued badges is blacksmithing. I'm really just including this one because it sounds awesome. This would be replaced by the more modern badges, metalworking and welding. The former focuses more on like metal science, as well as like shaping it with hand tools, and welding is very specifically about welding and using welding tools and welding safety. I just kind of wish that I could like do blacksmithing now. I think that would have been cool. One that really caught my eye, consumer buying, which just sounds really just consumer. But it's actually not. It's actually not about collecting Funko Pops. It was actually concerning smart consumer habits like budgeting, being critical of advertising and stuff like that. There's an article that I found from the scoutsmarts.com which sort of describes some of this. A lot of these are really difficult to find the original badges or requirements for. The documentation online is actually surprisingly pretty sparse for a lot of these badges. But they described some of the, I guess they had a copy themselves, and they described some of the requirements or questions that you were required to ask of a certain product. Like, for instance, are they buying an item out of necessity or want? Why do they want it? Is the price they're willing to pay equivalent to the actual value of the item? Is that value real, or is it perceived? It's actually kind of a lot of very useful questions to be introducing and to make someone a smart buyer, and kind of ground you in like the hyper consumer, hyper capitalist society culture that we live in. Unfortunately, it was discontinued, probably just due to unpopularity, which I think is a bit of a shame. But it might be worth bringing back in the form of like some kind of information night or something like that. I mean, especially now we're constantly bombarded with advertising everywhere we go. I think that would actually be a neat one to bring back in some kind of form, even if not like an entire badge. There is the personal management merit badge, which is Eagle required, and also does concern personal finances and stuff, but it's more like, I mean, I have it. That's really more about budgeting and like how does a mortgage work, as opposed to the more specific kind of critical thinking skill set that this one is about. The next one that I wanted to talk about is dairying. Dairying. It's all about cows and the dairy farming process. It actually is an extremely brief merit badge that has like 4 or 5 requirements, and all of them are like 1 sentence long, such as requirement number 4, be able to milk. This one I think was just discontinued for the fact that it's very specific, and also kind of really difficult depending on where you live. Some people just don't live in areas where cows or dairy farming are easily accessible, and this would end up being rolled into other merit badges like animal science, particularly, and things like that. I think it's called animal science. It's one of the. It would be the dairy education. Would be combined into something else. Okay, this one is a little funny because it's actually a badge that sort of exists today. It was discontinued and then it was brought back much later. It's the inventing badge, and one of the standout qualities of it is that it was originally discontinued because in its 6 years of existing, it I believe existed in it was like from 1911 to 1917 about. It was only achieved by 10 scouts, and you're like, why is that? The inventing badge? Or like you come up with a product or a little invention, a device or something? Yeah, it did include that, but then it also required you to attain a federal patent, which is like ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to ask of like a 12-year-old. Like, get a patent. Nowadays, it exists as the invention badge and is much more widely achieved because the requirements are like, kind of reasonable and within the scope of a child to do. I want to talk about pigeon racing. You might be asking, that sounds really specific. What, like, I think I know what that means. What is pigeon racing? It's literally you take care of 4 pigeons until you raise their offspring to adulthood. I'm gonna repeat. You have 2 pairs, like 2 mating pairs of pigeons. You have to it says house them. It says house them until they lay eggs, and then each of their offsprings you have to then raise to adulthood. Whose idea was this? This is so. It's so hyper specific. I don't understand why it's specifically pigeons and not like any kind of bird. There's like other badges that focus on like specific animals. Like there's a dog care badge, but like dogs are a pretty common animal, at least in the United States, and the BSA is a US institution. Quick small correction. The example that I showed of the requirements is not actually from the Boy Scouts of America pigeon raising merit badge, but rather the Boy Scouts of the Philippines merit badge, which I did not know was a thing. I was able to track down what I could manage of the original BSA pigeon raising merit badge book. And it's an extremely limited preview, but it does contain very similar verbiage. Maybe not quite the same thing about raising their children to maturity as well, but you're still keeping pigeons for like 3 months, which, I don't know, still just seems crazy to me. Then there's all of the plant-based ones from over the years, such as small grains and cereal foods, fruit and nut growing, fruit culture, citrus fruit culture, grasses, legumes, and forage crops, corn farming, botany, and nut culture, all of which were rolled into various degrees of plant science, gardening, soil and water conservation, those kinds of things. Grasses, legumes, and forage crops, citrus fruit culture. I'm sure at one point in time these made sense, but like looking back on it, why do you need so many? Why do they have to be so? Why do you have to separate them like that? And finally, I want to wrap this up with the incredibly complicated farm merit badge lineage. Speaking of things that I guess made sense at the time, in 1928, not one, not two, but three farming-based badges were introduced to the handbook. Those would be farm records and bookkeeping, farm home and its planning, and farm layout and building arrangements. Those, I guess those had to be distinct. Farm records and bookkeeping then became farm records, which then became farm and ranch management, which then became agribusiness, which no longer exists. Farm home and its planning and farm layout and building arrangements would be combined into farm arrangement, which then became farm arrangements, plural. It also does not exist anymore. The only farming-based merit badge, or at least the only one with farm in its name, is farm mechanics, so I suppose they were merged into that in some way. There's also the gardening merit badge and animal science. Maybe that. Why were there some? Why were there? Why would you put three? Why do you need three farming badges? Anyway, this has been a quick little look at some very goofy scouting history. I think that this stuff is pretty fun. The history of merit badges and all the weird ones. I mean, even today, if you look at the ones that are on offer, I mean, I think it's kind of funny that certain ones might be discontinued for being too niche or whatever. And at the same time, they offer fingerprinting merit badge. I have fingerprinting merit badge. Is it not? Is it not on my sash? Did I lose the? I had the blue card for it. Did I never get a physical copy of fingerprinting? That was my first merit badge. I don't have it. I don't have it on here. That's crazy. Well, anyway, yeah, they offer fingerprinting. When did I get metalworking? I genuinely don't remember getting metalworking. Was that at like camp one year or something? One thing actually that this kind of told me is that there is a surprising lack of documentation online. I mentioned it earlier, but a lack of documentation online about merit badges and what their requirements are, which is sort of weird because the merit badge books are basically free to find as PDFs. It's not like they're, especially discontinued ones, like essentially historical documents. I can't imagine those would be under any kind of like super valuable lock and key. Like, I think it's just because no one's really decided to gone through and go through and do it, and actually like record what was in these badges and what was their requirements at the time. Yeah, I had to rely on other people who basically just recounted or copied out of books that they had. So that's a little funny. Yeah, so it would be cool if there was more historical bookkeeping on this stuff. That's it. Bye.